thank you for bearing with us with the ring. We were hoping a few more of our guests would join us, but I'm sure they will be coming in. I'm really delighted to welcome all of you tonight to this Asia 21 Next Generations Fellow China Youth in 2024. And we have two Asia 21 Next Gen Fellows with us. And I think some of you have asked us about what is the Asia 21. And in fact, Pauline is one. We have quite a few Asia 21 Fellow. And each year, Asia Society, with all the centers, along with New York, they select about 25 to 30 candidates to be the Next Gen Fellow. And it started about 20 years ago, and I think the idea actually came from Hong Kong, but New York executed it. And it's really to identify fellows and future leaders from across Asia, representing diverse sector, academia, arts and culture, as well as business, civil society, government, law, media, public health, and so on. And the program, it really encouraged the young. It's a bit like, I think Neville was also part of the Global Shaper program with WEF, World Economic Forum, similar to that. But I think there is an Asia focus. And so those of you who are interested in learning more about it, and if you have young Asia 21 fellow that you would like, potential candidates, please feel free to look it up in our website. And there have been many. And I think, Neville, you were last year, and Zach?
Last year as well.
Okay, so two brand new fellows, so we're really delighted that they are here with us. And in the future, we're going to be doing more programs like this with our Asia 21. And those of you who know Diana David, Diana, I think, was part of the first class of Asia 21, and there's a very active Asia 21 network here in Hong Kong. So we're really, they're kind of our resources. There are resources that can help us kind of shed light on what's happening in the younger generation, and not just here in Hong Kong, but throughout Asia. So we're Asia Society's, Hong Kong is very fortunate that tonight we have Zak Dychtwald with us, and founder and CEO of Young China Group, and Neville Lai, who's curator for Global Shapers Community Hong Kong. And both of them are going to give us kind of a fireside chat. Zak had a book out about China's youth, I think published pre-COVID. So tonight's conversation is about China's youth post-COVID, and I'm sure there were some changes. We read about, hear a lot about the lie-down generation. A lot of changes going on, and the youth unemployment and all that. I'm sure both of them can shed some lights on this hot topic. And really, thank you all for being with us. And I think you saw some of the program that's coming up even this week. We have some great programs, and next Monday we're going to have Asia Society trustee Nicholas Aguzen give us a talk. I think he started when he became the CEO of Hong Kong Exchange. Now that he's left the Hong Kong Exchange, he's also going to give us his thoughts on having served as CEO for a couple of years, and about what's happening in his view about the economic situation in Hong Kong and the world. But tonight, we're going to hear about the youth, and I already have some great questions for Zak already, but I know you will enjoy that, and I look forward to having Zak back, either the new book or the book that you already have, because our bookstore, as you know, carry all the books from speakers. So we would welcome Zak back at any time, and also Neville. So I'm going to hand it over to the two of them to get the program started. Thank you.
Testing. Yeah. So thank you, Alice, for a great introduction, and also shedding light on a very important and also timely topic that we are here to discuss today. And I think, and thank you for all the esteemed guests to walk up the stairs and under a rainy day. I think, and taking the time, very important time, before dinner. And before we start off our discussion, I just want to give a little bit of a structure of how we're going to discuss this, right? So we were having a call this afternoon, actually, just to run through some last bit of point of discussion. So we will structure our discussion on youth on business, you know, like youth attitude towards work and business, and youth on society, and also youth on its role in the changing world. So it's more like, you know, going global. So yeah, so let's crack on. So, you know, our observation on youth approach to work.
Neville, before we jump in, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself for those of you who don't know? We're gonna do some introductions here so you can know the right questions to ask. And first, I will say briefly, for those of you who are interested in Asia 21, we met last December. We have since spoken quite a lot. I've had the opportunity to meet 5 or 6 different fellows just since December around the world. If you're considering applying, definitely do. The most special part of the program, with great respect to the structure around it, is definitely the people. And so there's a lot of young folks here today, and I definitely encourage your participation if you're thinking about it. So a bit about you before we launch, if that's all right.
Yeah, sounds good. Yes. So I was born and raised in Hong Kong. So I spent 8 years in Europe, 5 years in UK, a couple of years in 2 years in France, and also 1 year in you know, going around you know, in Myanmar and also with the UN. So that was my background. Like, so I've always been, you know, in the Hong Kong education system before, you know, going to the UK, you know, like doing higher education, etc. So I think that really broadens my worldview a little bit. And at the same time, coming back to Hong Kong only like slightly after 2019. So I had the experience going through the COVID phase of things, and also, you know, like the so-called geopolitical tensions, particularly over the last 5 years. And I think we will touch on slightly on that later on as well. But yeah, so that's my brief intro, and also hopefully my background will help you to appreciate my view a little bit more.
And I'm going to pry a little bit more. I was told last night at the I was on an event at AmCham, and I was told that I was with a Hong Kong KOL, phenomenal writer, excellent professional, and I think a lot of young people and all generations look to Neville for an interesting and fresh perspective on Hong Kong and the world.
Well, I mean, thank you for the compliment. Yeah, so I do write things here and there, and yeah, I publish, you know, like articles primarily on Hong Kong affairs, and also how youth, like roles in a changing world, can also help us to solve some of the state tensions, and also, you know, how we can drive collaboration among this geopolitical, you know, time.
Excellent. And I'm going to do a 35-second version of me. My name is Zak Dychtwald. I'm from Northern California, school in New York. First time in Asia was studying abroad at the University of Hong Kong. And after 6 months of studying Chinese literature, economics, and politics, went back to New York and felt bored. And that has brought me back to the greater China area ever since. I have been primarily in Suzhou and Chengdu since 2012. And in 2018, wrote a book called Young China, How the Restless Generation Will Change Their Country and the World. Came out with St. Martin's Press. And formed an organization called the Young China Group, basically hoping to do the research that I was doing for the book, but with a little bit more scale. COVID happened, I got stuck outside of China, met my wife, that's a different story, and just moved back to China about a year ago, where we are now based in Shanghai. And it occurs to me that one thing that we did not write into the questions is Young China post-COVID. And so we can think about that. I will try to weave that in as we go. At some point over the course of the conversation, I will also try to build out some of my foundational views, just so you can have a better sense of this young generation in mainland China. It's not focusing on Hong Kong. And in fact, there's a chapter in the book that never got published called The Other Chinas, based on Hong Kong and Taiwan. It didn't get published for not political reasons. I didn't feel like I had enough research on the topic, but it's a chapter I was actually paging through in an old file last night to remind myself of you know, what I was thinking and researching at the time. It's an honor to be here. This is a beautiful, beautiful property, and I'm really looking forward to the evening.
Great. Yeah. That aside, so shall we delve into more on youth, on work and business? So Zach, I want to ask you the first question on the job market in China. Obviously, how have the attitude of young people have changed over the course of decades, or pre and post COVID? If you have views on that already, so youth attitudes towards the job market.
Bad is an easy answer, right? So I think the way to understand this is actually through a historical context. So pre-COVID, it was very easy to say that young people in mainland China, and a quick other note about my research, I was primarily in second and third tier cities, much different than if I were just to do it in Shanghai or Beijing. So we got a pretty diverse view of the country and made an effort to do so, with less exposure in more rural areas, although not zero exposure. So we talk about youth in China. China doesn't do generational naming the way that we are accustomed to see it probably in Hong Kong and certainly in North America and Western Europe. So in China, you talk about generations on the decade, the post-60s, the post-70s, post-80s, post-90s. The generation I was writing about was the post-90s generation. The post-90s generation, it was very easy to say, had experienced the most amount of growth of any major economy and population within that economy on Earth. So much so that I actually ended up creating something called the Live Change Index that would contextualize that. The Live Change Index was pretty much a response to when I would tell people that things change fast in China, and they're like, things change fast in Brooklyn or London or whatever it is. I'm like, not the same. So in 1990, the per capita GDP in mainland China was around $300. So my friends, their quality of life was dictated by a fairly low annual spend and annual income from their parents when they were born. Since they were born to 2020, the per capita GDP in China increased 33x in their lifetime. As a comparison, in 1990 in Northern California, when I was born, from then till 2020, actually 2022, the per capita GDP has increased about 2.5x. So 2.5, 33. It's not just a developing country thing, right? Look at India, the other demographic giant of Asia. 1990, 2022, the per capita GDP over time has increased about 6x in that same period of time. And so for this generation, the job market and their attitude towards work, wealth, opportunity was really defined by China speed. And when we talk about China speed, we're used to talking about China speed. We don't really think about the psychology of China speed. What growing up at that pace of change does to your expectations for the world, your expectations for the job market, towards what you will earn, your expectations towards the government and the opportunities that they'll provide. And so leading up into 2020, that generation had only known bull market, expansion, opportunity. This sense that if you work hard, there will be opportunity on the other side. Alibaba was always hiring. Pinduoduo had its doors open. If you found the right job, you could either be on the right road to a certain level of monetary success, or you could start your own business. Particularly 2016 to 2019 was a really exciting entrepreneurial moment in mainland China. Everyone felt like they could raise if they wanted. If you had a good idea, you could get money for it. What's happened since is a generationally defining economic earthquake and recession. A really easy corollary is the financial recession in the United States for the older millennial cohort in the United States and Western Europe in particular. What happened to that generation with the financial recession is if you entered the job market then, first, it was much harder to find a job. Second, you were starting on a wage track that was 30% lower than the same person a year before. And that lower wage track sticks with you for the next decade at least. It's what we've seen in the research, at least in the United States. And so you have this generation in China right now on the back end of a generationally defining economic low, you could argue political low. 25% youth unemployment was the last number they reported before they stopped reporting. It's at 15 now, but who's to say? What we're seeing now on the ground is an integration of this new economic reality into this young generation's worldview. Different than 2023, which was, I think of it as an after an earthquake time. 2022 was a long earthquake, you know, a year of the on again, off again economy. Is this company going to be open 2, 3, 4 weeks of the month? Are we going to be able to go out 2, 3, 4 weeks of the month? Are we going to be able to hire people 2, 3, 4 weeks of the month? Are we going to be able to raise money 2, 3, 4 months down the line? The answer was typically no in that situation. 2023, you know, what do we do after an earthquake? We all had an earthquake here recently. You wait to see if there's going to be another one. And so in 2023, the level of caution and concern that the future might look more like 2022 than 2019 really stopped a lot of young people in their tracks. Now what we're seeing is there's a lot of young people who have integrated this new weaker economy, this new weaker job market, this, you know, the perpetual threat of layoffs into their new worldview. Many have moved from first tier to second tier cities during COVID. Many are deciding to stay. We actually have some interesting data on that, which we can talk about later. And the values of this generation haven't changed, which is a greater interest in personal satisfaction, not wanting to delay gratification like their parents did, but wanting to enjoy the moment. Those values haven't changed. The economic realities of this generation, broadly speaking, have changed pretty dramatically. I'm going to pause there.
Yeah, perhaps I can share a little bit of my observation on the Hong Kong job market.
Please.
Yeah, so I think towards the end, I think the value and also the observation or the approach to work, especially among the millennials and the Gen Z, have been very different to the baby boomers, etc. Right? So we are seeing they're more value driven. They are more concerning the state of the world that they live in, and also being, value driven and more associated with values derived from wokeism. Like the Western concept of, being woken up from social injustice, and they are more concerning the marginalized community, being inclusive, workplace diversity, LGBTQI plus rights, etc. So that's the one thing that we can say. And the second thing that we can say, young people are more inclined to go for jobs, doing business for good. So we are seeing more metrics are coming out, like measuring companies in terms of the ESG standards, in terms of ESG compliance. We're also seeing, like different companies are doing CSR, or they are doing create social value as opposed to just doing voluntary work like with some underprivileged communities. So that's the second observation. And the third observation, especially after COVID, we see a lot of young people focus on the work-life balance. And a number of research that came out actually shows that 9 in 10 millennials in Hong Kong actually put flexible lifestyle over money. So that is very, very staggering, because it seems that money is not as important as it was before. So, but money is still very important. But again, a flexible lifestyle is another big trend.
Do you find, so one of the, when we do generational research, and there's a world of generational theory that I won't get into very much here, but there's typically one question that you could ask around the world and get a really good thermometer on the state of youth, which is, do you think that you will live better than your parents? Right? Do you think you'll be better off than your parents? I can say this in mainland China. I'm very curious about Hong Kong. But in mainland China, the answer is definitively yes. Like, again, 1990, China was extraordinarily poor. If you were trying to go to the United States, you'd be an economic refugee rather than, LVMH having an entire crack China team just so that they could sell more expensive stuff to a certain place. Very different economic realities. The second question that you have to ask, though, now, which complicates things, is, do you think you have more opportunity than your parents' generation did? And the answer in China is to no. The level of growth, the unique level of growth that was happening then, the sense that you could get out of your social class to get ahead, the belief that if you worked hard, it would bring a good outcome, rather than working hard, there's 12 million graduates every year in mainland China. There's not enough jobs for them, clearly. There's also 30 million factory jobs that are going unfilled, by the way, in mainland China. So it's not that there aren't jobs, it's just not the jobs that this generation wants, to your point about values-driven, what is my life for? Do you have a sense that the feeling that there's opportunity right now in Hong Kong, not just are we gonna live better off than our parents' generation, but is there enough opportunity to excite us and captivate us?
Yeah. So my take on this is quite simple. I think there's a big sense of pessimism, especially among the young population. But a sense of pessimism doesn't mean a sense of powerlessness. I think those are two big distinctions. I think we'll talk a bit about more on that. About Tangping and also Bailan. All those social phenomenon that we've been seeing in mainland China these days. But I think there's a sense of pessimism among young Hong Kong youth, but it's not a sense of powerlessness. It seems like people are saving hard. They try to live the lifestyle that they want, and by going abroad, doing different things, and also having a slasher culture. So, but yes, pessimism.
What about opportunity here versus elsewhere? One of the things that always strikes me about Hong Kong is there are very few pressure valves. When the rent gets too high in Shenzhen, you move to Chengdu. When the rent gets too high in Chengdu, you move to Changsha. When the rent gets too high in Changsha, you move back to Mianyang, north of Chengdu. And it's pretty good. And you'll still feel like you're at home. There's very few places in the world where you can leave a city and there's nowhere else that feels like home. Hong Kong is one of those. As you think about the mounting financial pressure, you talk about young people not doing work for money, or at least not that direct link. We know that there's a lot of young people seeking opportunity elsewhere. We know that there's different visa schemes and opportunities to go elsewhere that didn't exist in the past. How are young people looking at measuring global opportunities versus what's available here in Hong Kong? And I know I'm totally deviating from the script, so I apologize.
Yeah. Well, I think we had a little bit of discussion on that before. Similar question. So I think, using the New York case, right? So if you want to move away from New York, and you can do Chicago and go to Texas afterwards, but you don't hear people moving from Central all the way to Jordan and then new territories. It just doesn't. It's not a concept here in Hong Kong. It seems that, okay, even though living up north, the rent may be cheaper, but it's still very high. There's not a huge wage differential. The cost of living differential, between these places. But if you talk about Shenzhen and Chengdu, there's a big difference. There's a sizable difference. So I say, we've been seeing an emigration trend over the past few years from 2020, and I've been seeing reports, saying 500,000 people have left the city, and I've also been seeing, reports about 200,000. So let's take a median. We're talking about 300,000 people left the city over the course of 4 years since COVID to now. So what's the concept of 300,000 people? It's the size of Chunwan. So the population in Chunwan is around 300,000. And we're seeing one of the districts just disappear, from Hong Kong. So that is quite staggering. And let alone we're talking about those people who can move out of Hong Kong are likely to be the ones who are middle class or middle upper class, and working class, because they just don't have the means to move. So, in terms of economics opportunities, I think the unemployment rate is quite okay in Hong Kong, the recent statistics. But I think if you're talking about, we are trying to climb the ladders, it's been always a Hong Kong problem about property tycoons and property housing prices and all that. So high cost of living. So, but I think young people are still working hard on this.
Quickly on the Tangping and Bailan words. So lying flat, I'm sure many of you have heard the concept of the lying flat generation in mainland China, right? Everyone, it's gotten a lot of ink. It's always interesting to see which of these phrases, there's hundreds of them, but which of them sort of penetrate the New Yorker and get written about and read about all around the world. Lying flat definitely has done that. Bailan is way worse. It means rotting on the shelf. So it's like, I'm not even going to be at work and lie flat, which means not really work very hard, or sort of quiet quit, go home, lie flat, and be a full-time son or daughter, which is another phrase that has come out recently. Rotting on the shelf means just not even attempting to enter the job market, that your skills that you've worked so hard to acquire over a lifetime, you'll let them go to waste. There's a lot of questions about the motivation about this young generation in mainland China, which are mostly unfair. There's a certain level of entitlement that people sort of assume of this young generation. The old generation worked so hard so that the young generation could have a better life. The young generation now just doesn't want to work. They want to be full-time sons and daughters and lie flat all the time. The reality is, for this young generation, the most defining characteristic of their childhood was pressure. We heard it all over the country, and I'm sure nobody in Hong Kong can relate to very high pressure, right? But the pressure to get into literally a good elementary school, the competition to get into a good middle school, competition to get into a good high school, a good university, the competition on the higher education market, the competition for the property market, which are some of the most distorted in the world, the competition on the marriage market, and the feeling that if you weren't married by 30 and having kids, that you were the leftovers. To me, lying flat is the perfect sort of quiet rebellion against a pressure cooker system that for years was telling these young people that you're not enough and you need to grind it out more. And particularly when grinding it out was not yielding the outcomes that they were promised, which is a home, the feeling that you could get married and afford to have children in the city in which you're working. That when that promise wasn't able to be kept, this young generation has felt fed up. Now, not everybody is lying flat, and not everybody is rotting on the shelf. There are ample amount of motivated young people who are seeking out these high-powered jobs. But one of the most interesting things that we've seen since COVID is this reevaluation of what a life is for. Is it to run into a first-tier city? Pinming the 去赚钱. Pinming literally means to put your life on the line to make money. Pinming 去赚钱. Like every time we would hear, like, what are you doing in Shenzhen? We're like, that's what we're doing. We're busting our tails for what? And this question of for what is being asked and answered around the country. There are some people who are moving to Dali and are saying, we actually don't want to do that. We just want to have a high quality of life. We want to have a little garden. We want to fall in love, raise a kid where there isn't that level of pressure. Chengdu, a lot of people are going because they want to have a high quality of life, a decent job. They're downgrading from what they were expecting from Shenzhen. But they also want to be able to go out on Thursdays and Fridays and have a community of people, good food, and good Chinese medicine, if not Western medicine. So this question of what a life is for, COVID really challenged that. And a lot of these buzzwords that get put out around the job market give a bad rap to a generation who has been just pitted against one another for a limited set of jobs, a limited set of educational opportunities, and what feel like a limited set of broader opportunities. I'm not even going to get to marital opportunities, which also feel limited. And they're tired of it. And particularly in COVID, we're at a moment of reduced opportunity all around, where these folks aren't hiring the way that they used to. Investors are not investing the way that they used to, so that there aren't these entrepreneurial opportunities to sort of get off of the wage track. We're seeing a fair amount of people who are, I don't want to say fed up, because I think when people hear fed up, they imagine protest. And there are elements of that, but certainly disappointed and absolutely unclear about how to, about what level of motivation and ambition will yield the results that will allow them to live that life in a first or even second tier city that they expected. I wanted to clear the air. I'm sure everyone has heard the lying flat and bailan vocabulary. It's not as simple as they're not motivated. It was easier to be motivated when if you worked hard, you'd get what you were working for. When the economy was going up and to the right for 20 years, that was much more likely to happen.
So Zach, so just to follow up on that, so what would be the business implication, or what could employers do to in light of this situation?
Yeah. No, it's a great. I mean, truthfully, it's a phenomenal opportunity for decent employers who have good jobs and need talent. Because if you treat somebody decently, if you give them 2 days of a weekend, if you pay them for overtime, which they will be taking, and you give them a clear opportunity to advance, which is around the world sort of management 101. Chinese companies haven't had to do that for a lot of years because they had a lot of students competing for a limited amount of jobs, and they could treat these young people like they were disposable, and they did. Now, this young generation is like, well, we don't need, we're not going to take that deal anymore. And so for employers who are willing to treat their employees decently, train their employees well, give them a path towards the future, which, by the way, a lot of global companies actually have a major advantage here. Global companies were having disadvantages in China for a variety of structural reasons. It actually became much more appealing to work for a strong domestic company rather than a global firm. Now I think it's a wonderful opportunity for global firms to show their maturity, the sophistication of their management schemes, to incentivize and properly treat young people, and you're going to get just an incredible return on that. In fact, you see a lot of top talent from China. It was funny. So in 2020, in June, a lot of top talent from China who was living in America all went back to China because they were like, America is losing it over COVID. No one's getting a vaccine. This is scary. China has figured it out. People are back in the offices. They're back at malls. Mid-2022, that same group of talent, after a year and a half of working, went back to the United States because it looked like China was losing it. Lockdowns, et cetera. There is this sort of free agency of really top talent who is much more globally unmoored right now. They're interested in going back to China because it's home. And so if there are opportunities, compensation, but also just dignity associated with the job that is commensurate with their level of professionalism and what they can put forward, they can be a tremendous asset. So I think it's a tremendous time to hire. The downside of that, if you're going to be a bad boss, which used to be more okay, that no longer will be tolerated. And so, I mean, it sounds funny, but most people are bad bosses unless they get forced to be better bosses. And we're seeing a major reckoning with that now in China. When I first wrote Young China, there weren't a lot of young people who were working. The crazy thing about young people is we grow older and enter the workforce. And so a lot of the core workforce now was not working when didn't have critical roles when I was interviewing them, but we've kept in touch. And over the years, we've seen how some have gone in certain directions, others are totally lying flat back home. So we've seen a major, and we do a lot of actually workforce research with a couple of Fortune 500s on this topic. How do you motivate people properly in China? It's different than in the United States. So I'm going too long here, but I do think it's an incredible opportunity for those employers who want to treat people decently. It's harder to treat people decently, and the market isn't prepped for that. But if you are willing to do that, now is the time.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree on Zach on that. Like, yeah. So I think, yeah, the well-being of workers, also like a sense of room for growth, mentorship, and also I mentioned a little bit about slasher, right, just now. I think we are also seeing increasing number of young people who are doing different things at the time, like with diversity of interests. Like they could be a banker like in daytime, and in the evening or weekend time, they're just showcasing their culinary skills, on Instagram, or like, baking skills like somewhere else, or like how they train their pets, for instance, how they train their dogs, like they're showcasing, some other things on YouTube, on other social media platform, etc. So I think there's a sense of
secondary income. And what was the word that you used?
A slasher.
Slasher. Okay, good.
Slasher.
Just these are don't rush through these because these are good. There's a global nature to some of this, truthfully. And it's interesting to see it bubbling up in Hong Kong as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So that would be our first session. And shall we move on to the next one? Youth on society and also government. So quickly on society. So longevity, kids, one-child policy, and all these big things. Like Zak, what's your take on that? Sorry, that might be a Herculean task.
It's a loaded
in a
one.
few minutes.
I want to make sure I'm conscious. What time is the session over tonight? As
we have 10 more minutes or
10 more minutes. Okay. Well, then I will be very brief on fertility issues. China's average longevity has doubled in the last 70 years. It's one of the most incredible longevity revolutions in modern history. That's an enormous burden as well as a miracle. Young people will not have kids. The incentives that it will take for them to have kids will work primarily in second and third tier cities, which are consumption vouchers, essentially. But in first tier cities, the numbers that they're talking about will not be enough to incentivize. It's not just a China thing. It's an urbanization thing. Demographers love to say that the best form of birth control is urbanization. Because in rural life, kids are assets. You have more of them, you have more people to help around the house. There isn't the constraint of city life where more space costs more money. As soon as you enter a city, that asset becomes a liability, the cost of education, the cost of food, the cost of an extra room, the cost of a nanny if you have to work 2 jobs. I mean, it just piles up. China's urbanization rate has inverted over the last 30 years. So there are actually fertility rates in many cities in China that are far below what was expected from the one-child policy. And they reached that number even before the housing market got as distorted as it is today. So long and short of it is young people will not be having more kids. What is interesting is now millennials are having their own kids. And so the way that they parent them, the decisions they make about what kind of education they want, what they tell their kids makes for a happy life. That's all being decided in real time right now. And here in Hong Kong?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, young people are not having as many kids as they were before. I mean, as Zak rightly mentioned, I don't think the 20K from the consumption voucher or whatever like by the government actually helps to stimulate the short-term effect. So, but this year was the year of the dragon. So I suspect there should be a little bit more kids.
Bump. You want to have some dragon babies. There is going to be a little bit of a bump, but it's not enough to change the outcomes of demographic trajectory.
Exactly. Yeah. So, well, and also a very interesting fact: Hong Kong actually has the highest life expectancy in the world. So, 84 for women and 82 for men. And why do I mention that? Because it seems that we are all moving towards the direction of aging population, etc. So we are also seeing we are being younger for longer. So that's a huge concept that we need to get across our population. Is being 60 is not old. I mean, like we have like we have like these terms coming out, young, old, etc. So we have to reconceptualize our society. We are being younger for longer. And our economic forces could contribute something in the longer term. Yeah,
I'm going to do something a little bit tricky here, and you can. I want to make sure that we have time for questions.
Yeah.
We are going to talk about youth in government. We expect that you'll probably ask us questions about that. So I might push that to the end for some of the questions. There's a couple of topics that we can and cannot touch on, particularly with the cameras on, which I understand that everyone will be sensitive to. I do want to talk about Chinese youth in the world. I think here in Hong Kong's been so global for so long, so entrenched in the global fabric for so long. How do Hong Kong youth view their role in addressing global challenges? How do they view Hong Kong's role in the next decade?
Yeah, I think this is this relates to some of the points that I mentioned earlier about like young people are more associated with work values. Like they are more aware of the global challenges such as climate change or ungoverned AI and also like geopolitical tensions, and water safety, sanitary, public health, all other issues. So what that means is that despite big power politics, we're talking about nation actors. We're talking about U.S., China, and also Hong Kong. What happened over the past couple of years. We are seeing a group of young ambassadors in Hong Kong and also in China and also other parts of the world. They are very keen to solve challenges together. So what that means is that we, like different countries, despite their differences, despite their nationwide sort of tensions, we are seeing sub-state actors, which are the group of young ambassadors, that they are coming together, solving different crises using innovative solutions. And one of which I want to mention, the different youth groups that we've been mentioning about Asia 21. We've been talking about World Economic Forum, that One Young World, like they're all different kinds of youth organizations that are, bringing young people together. And, even though, country to country level kind of tensions we're seeing now, young people can somehow collaborate and also, drive the next phase of globalization. So that's my.
Can I add one question to this, which is, how do young people in Hong Kong view mainland China? Simple question, I'm sure.
Very simple, yeah. I think recognizing what's happening over the past couple of years, we are seeing more young people are willing to go abroad. And abroad, in a sense, not just going to the West. I mean, I think over the last 2-3 decades, when like Hong Kong people or Hong Kong youth are going abroad, they always think of going to the West. The West meaning the UK, US, Europe, or like Australia, like the Anglo-spheric kind of world. And now we are seeing there are more Hong Kong youth are more interested in the Greater Bay Area, for instance. And there are also youth that are more increasingly engaging with like the East Asia side, Japan, South Korea, Southeast Asia, other parts of the world. So I'm seeing a more global Hong Kong in the sense, we are more open-minded and we're shifting away from our, traditional mindset of going abroad.
With
No. With question, yeah.
With an eye to time, though,
Yeah.
I do want to open it up to the audience. Does that sound good to everybody? Do people have difficult questions? We're aiming at difficult questions. First, thank you so much. And
thank you, Zach. Yeah.
I know this question.
Oh yeah, thank you so much for the wonderful, insightful session, and really enjoyed. I have a question for both of you, actually. I'm sorry, it'll take a little long in answering my questions. So, Zach, for you, we spoke about the youth and the change in the approach and the viewpoint that they have, and also the disillusionment, perhaps, if I might use that word. So, this seems to me at loggerheads with the Grand China narrative. And so how do you think this would affect the ambitions of the Chinese economy, that it is aiming for itself in the international system? Also, for you, Neville, you refer to the influence of wokeism, repeatedly among the Hong Kong's youth. Essentially, wokeism is a concept not native to this part of the world. We might call it a Western concept. So, would you say that this is just a penetration of the Western values, or perhaps Westernization of the society? And also, a caveat on that is like, does this inclination have something to do with Hong Kong's youth's perception with increased affinity, with China due to political changes? So
I like that second question a lot. Do you want to start there?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Zach.
Throwing you under the bus.
Thank you for the question. I think it's a fair question, and yes, I mean the neologism of wokeism, like they're from the West, but I think we are seeing also, in general, the sense of doing business for good. I think wokeism is about marginalized communities, etc., and also it's not unique to the West, and Well, I mean, although it might have been, influenced by the West, but it's not uniquely to the West. And I think these are the concepts that, that could be transpired by social media, etc. But the wokeism that I wanna drive away perhaps is more on the doing business for good. I think we are seeing young people are more aware of the community. And also what is good for the community, like how we can use business solutions to solve some of the societal challenges. So that's a brief take on that. But I can take it offline to talk to you after that too. So.
I want to add quickly to that. So as you're thinking about Gen Z as a global cohort, what's really interesting is if you look at baby boomers, which baby boomers were born 1945 to I think it's 1962. Give or take. Again, it's a Western construct. Baby boomers in Hong Kong are extraordinarily different than baby boomers in the United States. What they were seeing every day, what they were eating every day, the music they were listening to, what was around them, what they thought was cool, what they thought that was masculine, what they thought was feminine, what they thought was sexy, what they thought was ethical. True for Gen X, a little bit less true for millennials. Millennials were the first internet generation globally. And Gen Z is the first social media generation. There's a big difference between the two. The internet is search. Social media is connection. And so Gen Z really marks the first real convergence of a global generation. Some of the vocabulary around being woke is certainly Western. We're doing it in English. At the end of the day, I know English is a global language, but a lot of the vocabulary and trend setting ends up happening in Western Europe and North America, at least on the vocabulary. But being mission-driven is global. And we're seeing that amongst young people around the world. It's articulating itself in a way that is not Western-specific. And so while some of it is Western, the sense that doing right is an opportunity in the workforce, the sense that there are ways to live that are not as harmful, there's a sense that there are global challenges that have nothing to do with borders. And if we do not clean up our act, we are screwed, I think is the scientific term, collectively. Those aren't Western in nature. And so we're working on finalizing the launch of a global youth study right now. 10 countries, 10,000 participants. US, China are 2 of the 10, but it's really global. And this is one of the hypotheses that we're testing. Where are cultures converging? Where do they stay distinct? How does where you're from impact the way you see the world? So hopefully a year from now, I'll have a way cooler answer to this. On the second question around disillusionment, I would not use the word disillusionment, but I think in some ways it's a fitting one. And it's not just a China thing. There's a great South Korean book called The Betrayal of Hard Work, written by a Harvard psychologist, if I'm getting this right, in around 2013. And the sense was that you had a generation in South Korea who was working so hard to get into the right school, to get the right internship, to live in the right neighborhood, to join finance, to get the right job. And at the end of that, there would be a sense of success. Now, if you were part of the generation that was a part of the Asian economic miracle, which was 66 to 96, more or less, then if you worked hard, again, you were probably enjoining an economic trend that would lead to that level of success. They helped to make that trend, but many also rode that wave. For the generations after that, there is a broader feeling that that hard work doesn't necessarily lead to success. And it's felt all around Asia. I would say there's certainly that feeling in North America as well, but it's much more focused in areas where urban centers are the primary theater for life, if you will. And so this young generation in China, this is their first slowdown. This is their first bump in the road ever. And so when you've only known good times and suddenly the music slows down, it's hard not to feel deeply disappointed. I always caution people away from believing that means they're giving up on the system or that they do not believe that their system is better than others. When you're considering systems around the world, you don't just look at yours, you look at the alternatives as well. this is one of the weaker moments in this generation's history for how their country has performed economically, in the job market, geopolitically to a certain extent. But there is still a sense that this system works best for China, and also that that democracy doesn't export well. There's a lot of bias towards that. India is often held up as a comparison, honestly, which is a very rich vein to dive into that we're not going to have time for today. So disillusionment, I think, is fair. I don't think it's just a government thing, and I think there's a temptation to draw a direct line between the two. There's certainly correlation, and there's recognition that the government needs to deliver on optimism, and also that attitudes towards the government, at least in late 2022, were the worst that they've been in decades. But they weren't at rock bottom. Questions?
You talk about competition on an individual basis. But in terms of one of the great geopolitical trends is technological competition. So how does the sense of technological competition, sort of how is China versus the United States doing in AI? How is China versus the United States doing on biotech, on medical advances, et cetera, how does that translate into thinking at the youth level, both in respect of individual motivations, but their sense of how that impacts their role in society writ large? That's the larger question. But the second question, I want to come back to your question, Zach, and ask it back to you. Is there a Chinese mainland view of Hong Kong at this point among the youth? Thanks.
First question on competition. I could take a quick swing at it. I think it was Sam Altman who said this, but at one point, like 50% of the employees at ChatGPT, I want to get this right. So if, and Jin Keyu was talking about this last night as well. So we need to double check this stat. But at a major technology company, there was a joke that 50% of the people who were working on the core product were Chinese citizens, even though it was not a Chinese company. If you talk with a lot of medical researchers in the United States, the written language of science is English. The spoken language in the laboratories is Chinese in many places. Not in every discipline, but we hear it all of the time. In places that you wouldn't expect in the United States as well. I would say the young generation is opportunistic. There's disappointment that some of the leading technologies are being stifled in China. There is a sense that they want to work on the most challenging problems in the world. I think that perhaps the biggest disappointment is that no Alibaba, Jingdong, Tencent are not truly great global companies. And that the best and brightest from China haven't been able to make the global impact that their equivalent Western leaders have in their companies. There's a lot of pride around what BYD and the EV and the EV space at large is doing. The words China shock don't carry a negative connotation in China necessarily. There's denial around it, but there's the sense that we're creating something that's better, cheaper, more affordable for more people, and it's coming from us. The fact that there's even a competition, that there's any innovative parity between the two great powers, if you were to tell people that a decade ago, you would have been laughed out of the room, truthfully. So there's a tremendous amount of pride in that shift. There's a certain amount of agnosticism from an individual level about would you be willing to work at an American company on the EV question or the biotech question? Absolutely, for most people. If the money's right, if it's good for their family, if it's good for their future, yes. So there isn't a lot of nationalism. Maybe in the semiconductor space, we encounter that a little bit more. But a lot of these young people just want to be where the opportunity is at. And that isn't limited to just national organizations.
There's not much for me to add. Just one point. I think American companies in Hong Kong are still very attractive to Hong Kong youth. That's for sure. In terms of technology, Google, Facebook, Meta, etc. But I think Zach also mentioned briefly about semiconductor. I think that is the industry that we are seeing young people, they have to think about which side they pick, whether they work for the Western side or they work for the Chinese side. So I think these are the things that we've been discussing, very recently about the employee market in a very specific industry, and I think this is the inflection point.
the Hong Kong question. I'm going to say some things that might not make you all like me more, and I apologize for that, but they're honest. I say this as somebody also with a huge amount of affection for Hong Kong. There's a couple of layers for this. First, the attractiveness of Hong Kong as an education destination has increased. The value of Western education has actually gone down in a lot of people's eyes, and Hong Kong, the prestige of Hong Kong as an education destination has remained the same or gone up. So that's real. There's a lot of respect for the education opportunities here, the prestige of which has stayed steady or increased over the last handful of years. Two, there's a lot of young people who feel that Hong Kongers have looked down on mainland China. They've felt it for the last decade when they come to travel here. It's palpable for them. There's some resentment around the protests and the feeling that that gave them, that we don't want to be a part of you. And that's been building for years, this cultural friction, this identity friction between the two. So I don't imagine that's news, but it is widespread because a lot of these stories about, these were drummed up with propaganda as well, but they, and before the protest, they would still come up, which is, ex-mainland tourist comes to China, gets yelled at in public, gets humiliated in some way. Those had filtered through over the last decade. It's not new, but it certainly picked up during the protests. Third, and maybe the most dangerous, danger here is not political danger or actual danger. So I want to be specific with my verbiage. Outside of the greater Bay Area, a lot of young people don't think about Hong Kong all that much. It doesn't come up like it did a decade ago. It's a great place to travel. And truthfully, even as a shopping destination over COVID, there was other opportunities that were presented to domestic travelers in mainland China. I don't think Hong Kong is considered as special as it used to be. The flip side of that, and to your last point, I think there's more closeness now between the two. Whereas before there was a really distinct cultural identity between the two. I mean, it just didn't feel like they were the same nationality. Now I think, and you're seeing this with some of the porousness of people hanging out between Shenzhen and Hong Kong in ways that feel really natural for both sides, there's more closeness than there used to be, which has a positive side to it. There isn't as much, you're from a place that's too alien from my upbringing for me to understand on both sides of the equation. There's a lot of questions about what Hong Kong will be going forward. I think if you were to ask the average person, so not the educated elite, not an analyst at somebody's investment organization, but Hong Kong is another great Chinese city, and its role in the future will primarily be financial, and hopefully as a alternative to the China A-shares market can yield better results and alternatives for the country. Oops.
Should we have?
Hi, just to follow up on what you've been saying, Zach. So the Hong Kong government has rolled out the Top Talent Pass scheme in the global war for talent. And 90% of the applicants are from mainland China. The average age is 35. And around 36,000 people have come to Hong Kong. So my question is, how will these mainland talents transform Hong Kong? And how will Hong Kong transform these mainland talents?
I think for the time being, I think shall we just take a few questions in one go and we can address them so we can have the drinks on time. I think they're already there, and we can close it soon. So
we could also try to do a lightning round. I have a bad memory, and so if we do 3 at once, I will certainly forget. I can try to be briefer,
okay,
so sorry, I don't mean to thwart what I just agreed to you privately. Quickly, I don't know the answer to that. It's a great question. I'm not surprised at all that 90% are from mainland China. I'm sure, again, if they weren't trying to control, if they just looked at the scores, it might even be more than that. Like I said, it's still seen as a lot of prestige. It's also closer to home. That New York feels far away for most people, both economically as well as physically. How will Hong Kong transform this young generation? I think is a hell of a question. And I'm eager to know the answer as well. I do not know the answer today. I think a bigger question is how will these larger cohort transform Hong Kong? Because when you just play the numbers game, there's more impact to be had there. And I think this increasing closeness is inevitable. I think some of that will be good for the island and some of that will be bad.
Quickly, yeah.
So actually, I'm personally interested in, Zach, you mentioned that you have some observations of Chinese people living in Hong Kong and Taiwan, and maybe overseas Chinese in general. So what's your observation? Like, should we call them as Chinese diaspora? Like, what are their life goals in general? Just quick.
Another big question. You know, it's funny, in the US too, and this comes up all the time, I have friends who are first or second generation Chinese all over the world. They read the book and they say, do one on us. And I'm like, that's a very, you know, traveling to Indonesia, to San Francisco, it's not easy to do. What are their life goals? I don't think I can answer that responsibly. I think what you do get broader in the diaspora is a really strong sense of self, of being Chinese in one way or another. I don't think that dissipates over time or distance. I think you get people who are disproportionately entrepreneurial and hardworking, and you see that around the world. And a burning desire to make the life that they want. And often it can be as simple as buy a home, have a backyard for your kids, send them to the schools that they want, and ideally have a 2-day weekend.
Just more focused on the personal.
Very much so. I think this is also an area where the Chinese diaspora comes under fire a lot, is there, particularly in the United States and Western Europe, where there have been these anti-Chinese, but really anti-Asian hate crimes, different than other minorities in these localities. The Chinese diaspora does not congeal around one another. There isn't that sense of broader community, we can do things together, that other diaspora communities have shown. It's an area where, I mean, you see it in New York all the time. Like the Chinese community there will really criticize themselves online, for the most part, for not gathering around one another and supporting one another during difficult moments.
Very quick one. For the post-90 and post-2000 young people you surveyed, prior to this first downturn they have just encountered, prior to the Shanghai lockdown, I think they were very proud about what China has achieved, right? They were very proud about the system. Has that changed after lockdown, after after they encountered the first downturn? How are they, viewing the Chinese political and economic system? How, have their view about the party changed?
It's a great question. So there used to be when I would look at this generation, there was 5 points that I would go over: scale, speed, demography, something else, and pride. It's been a while, but pride was a really important piece of this, and I think that the fourth one would float and shift. Adaptive. Adaptive was number 4, but pride was always the 5th one, and it was always the most challenging abroad because there was a sense that that system was bad. Anyone who liked that system was brainwashed. Truthfully, that will always come out time and time again. Since not COVID, but 2022, and I think this is a really important distinction, for 18 months during COVID, so not the first 2, but really from June till 2020, June of 2020 to 2022, people in China felt like they were winning. It was an absolute reaffirmation of all of their positive beliefs about the positives of their system. If COVID was a morbid scoreboard, if you will, about which system could best protect their people, health of their people, allow people to get back into offices earlier, not threaten the livelihoods and lives of particularly the elder community, but everyone in the country, China was absolutely winning that race. So actually, before 2022, within China reaffirmed and re-emphasized that sense of not just our system is great, but superiority. 2022 is a major asterisk. And the way I describe it is that the bank of goodwill between young people and government was put at an all-time low in their lifetimes, which, to be fair, was pretty easy because it was going up for most of their lifetimes. But there is no doubt that the questions about how, that the wisdom of some of the responses to COVID, the sense that the best interest and particularly the livelihood element that we just talked about would be best protected, and that the response would be coordinated, city to city. The Shanghai lockdowns is the Shanghai lockdowns. People in Hangzhou were laughing at Shanghai because they felt they were handling it so much better. City to city, it was different. So there's definitely an asterisk next to that pride, undeniably. Again, the alternatives matter. They mattered in 2019 when this young generation would look out around the world, and they matter now today. I do think there are more challenges to, well, let me put this another way. I think there's a greater burden on the Chinese government now to be popular and to deliver on optimism for this young generation than there have been historically. I think they put themselves in that position. I think they're also keenly aware of that pressure. I think we often underestimate the call and response between government and people in China. Maybe not so much in Hong Kong, but certainly in North America and Western Europe. That from the folks and the conversations that I've had on this topic with government officials, that awareness of the need to deliver on optimism and create, at the very least, stability, which is a prerequisite for optimism, is very keen right now. So absolutely negative impact. But still a far cry from the sense that this system isn't best for us.
Shall we take the last question? Yeah, and we can take it offline afterwards.
Yeah, so because we're talking about like unemployment in China back then, and you're talking about the laying flat culture, and so because I have a conversation back then with one of my Chinese friend, and he told me like he wants to lay flat because he's very pessimistic in terms of like he feel like he can't find a job if it's not because of his parents having some relations and everything, some networking. So my question is like the nepotism thing, do you think it increased after COVID, before COVID, or has it always been a thing, or like does it have any impact on like the laying flat culture in China?
It's an interesting question. And again, Hong Kong, I'm sure, knows nothing about nepotism. So my attempt to be brief is I'm going to fail a little bit here. In 2012, the end of 2012, the very first speech that Xi Jinping gave was about anti-corruption. He did it at Peking University, if I'm remembering this right. He said, if you want to be rich, don't become a government official. The unwritten part of that was, if you are rich and you are a government official, look out. And it was covered abroad as this power jockeying at the top. The way it was felt everywhere else, and I was in Chengdu at the time, was a sense of clearing out the bodyguards at the back door. The sense that China was becoming more of a meritocracy. It was called the catching tigers and swatting flies. Very few people knew tigers, everyone knew a fly, which is that sort of greedy official who you'd have to ply with cigarettes and Mau Tai in order to get that job or that internship or the entrance into a certain university. That went down significantly over the last decade, pre-COVID. So 8 years pre-COVID, 7 years pre-COVID. Palpably. It didn't go to zero, but it went down considerably. And Pew has great data that the sense that you needed to know somebody in order to get ahead was the #1 concern of most of the Chinese populace in 2012 and 2013. Really good data behind this. So this is something that was actively being counteracted, and actually a very politically savvy piece from the government, recognizing again the need to be popular. This was very popular. However, during COVID, with the scarcity of jobs, the scarcity of positions, we have heard much more, you got to know a guy to get ahead sort of stories than we did in 2019. And it could be that those were sort of glazed over when jobs were more abundant and opportunity was more abundant, but they're definitely more pointed now. I don't think it's roaring back, and there's a revitalized anti-corruption campaign right now, especially in biotech. But the threat of nepotism still exists, and nepotism and corruption aren't the exact same thing, but there's high correlation. So yeah, you see it now, but if you compare it to the 2000s and early 2010s, I would say it still pales in comparison to what used to exist. I don't see the direct correlation between the COVID-19 and the resulting economic situation and nepotism, aside from there's fewer jobs, and so the access to those jobs, the value of that access increases, and so brokering that access has more value. So I do think on the margins it could increase, but I don't. The young people we talk to aren't talking about the guanxi element like they did in 2013, 14, and 15. Thanks for your question.
All right. I think Holly emailed me just before our session and asked me to do a wrap up, of our sessions, right? So I think one thing that I say, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for the excellent questions. I think, just grab Zak's card or Weixin afterwards. I think he has some great insights coming out. And also, just stay tuned to Asia Society's events. And also, thank you, Asia Society Hong Kong, for hosting us, and also some drinks are waiting for us in another room. So please feel free, and we can talk more later. Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.